Yes. Okay. It's a little bit of discussion of the legal environment in which you work in with school improvement in particular, and a little bit more general discussion about the way the law works around uh, schools and public education, because it's one of those things that our founding fathers did not necessarily see as something that needed to be dealt with in terms of a constitution. And it wasn't because it was the normal course of events. It was just because it was something that our founding fathers, being mostly from fairly well-to-do and land entitled folks, um, they didn't really care an awful lot about the common man. They were concerned about the taxes and the business environment for them with dealing with England. And had we had faster communication, we might not have had a revolution, because there was a certain segment of the American ruling class at the time that wanted to reach a concession with the king, with the crown. And it was just bad for business to do that, because by the time you requested something from England and you got the answer back, yes or no, it was 5-6 months later. And so it was, there were a lot of issues that the colonies wanted to have dealt with. And so we could say that if we had better communication, we wouldn't have the revolution, and we might all be speaking with a slightly more cockneyed accent these days, but it didn't work out that way. And so we did have the revolution we had, and we did have the Constitution, Articles of Confederation, and then the Constitution, when we discovered the Articles of Confederation weren't strong enough to kind of meld us together. But the one common element in the Articles of Confederation and in the Constitution is that nowhere in there was there ever any mention of education or public education. And so you had different customs and different cultural value sets around education. The Puritans and the folks up in New England area thought that education was essential to the pursuit of a religion, because their sense was that everyone had to be able to be accountable for their own sins. And so everyone had to be able to read the Bible, and everybody had to be able to make sense out of it. And everybody had to be able to count and figure, so that they wouldn't, run up debts that the community would then have to settle somehow. And so they felt education was important. And as a matter of fact, they required that if you had a village or a town or a township, you had to have a school. And the school had to provide for everyone, and not just men, but also females, but not too much, up to about third grade or fourth grade or something like that. But it was this sense that education was an important part of the community from a purely religious angle. Down south, most of the planters came from plantation owners came from a model of education, which the only important person in the household that got education was the oldest male. And most of that was tutored. There were not very many schools around in the Old South. And, the Mid-Atlantic was wedded to a model of apprenticeship. That, most of the Mid-Atlantic was designed to be a place where the craftsmen and, folks that worked with their hands and built stuff and things like that came to. And in the old world tradition, most of that was apprenticeship. And so if your father was a printer, you were a printer. And if your father was a carpenter, you were a carpenter. And so it was pretty much an apprentice model. So we didn't have a real, there was nothing that the founding fathers felt that they needed to put into the Constitution about education. And so not much happened until, after the Civil War, actually. You did have some movement toward compulsory education in parts of the country. And if you went out west and you built a town out west, you had to have a school. You had to have a one-room school. And it could be most of them were one-room schools. Some of them were made out of sod out on the prairie, and some were built into the side of hills, and some of them were made out of rocks. And if there happened to be enough wood around, you built a school. Now, and there was a sense that if you had a school, you had to have a teacher. And so there was somebody that would take over the job as a teacher. It was normally someone from the community and not necessarily anybody with any certain credentialing or anything like that. And very often the schools were tied closely to the church, and it was the minister and his wife, and the minister did the church and his wife did the schools. And so there was a different sort of cultural vibe there too. So you had about half a dozen different thoughts about schools going on up until after the Civil War. And certainly after the Nat Turner Revolution, the enslaved people were not provided with education. In fact, it was illegal in most states that had slaves to provide them with any. And so if the slave population got indentured, or slave population got an education, it was basically because somebody in their community or their culture, or a particular plantation wife or whatever had a sense that everybody needed a little bit of education, but it was illegal. And in some states it was a hanging offense to provide educations to slaves. So a lot of things were, the word education meant a lot of different things to a lot of people till after the Civil War. And then after the Civil War, actually during and after the Civil War, toward the end of the Civil War, the Congress passed the Morrill Land-Grant Act. And basically they realized that, particularly in the South and in the middle region of the country, of the new country, they were going to have a lot of infrastructure built, repaired. Near the end of the Civil War, most of the bridges and a lot of the barns and the railroads and all were torn up in the South as a means to prevent them from moving supplies around. And so the South was going to need a lot of work in terms of infrastructure. And so they created the Morrill Land-Grant Act. And out of that, in each state, they identified essentially two sites. A state could have two colleges that were supported by land grant. And so the feds would provide a significant land grant, and upon that the state was required to build a technical and agricultural college. And in North Carolina, that was NC State, was the white land grant college. And what was the black land grant college in North Carolina?
One at NC State.
No, NC State was.
Oh,
Was it
Carolina
Winston?
There was always two.
Was it Winston? That's a historically black college.
Yeah, I don't remember which one it was in North Carolina. Maybe I should have looked that up.
It would be A&T.
It probably was
land
A&T. It actually
Yeah.
was A&T. Yeah. And in Virginia, it was Virginia Tech, which was Virginia Polytechnic Institute and Technical University, State University. And it was down at Petersburg. Gosh, mine's gone crazy. But anyhow, there were always two. And the white one was almost always built first. The black one was built a few years later. And, you know, the budgeting on those was quite different. There was not an intent in any of those that women would be served. Then in the early 20th century, once again around another war, there was some sense, well, actually before that was some sense among industry leaders that we were going to have a stable workforce to work in the industries that were being developed at the time. And so there was a series of commissions, you know, the Vanderbilts and all of those folks were integral in those, in which they tried to determine how schools should be organized to be best functioning. And essentially they built the school model around the private liberal arts college model. And that, you know, it would prepare, you know, all students basically in two ways. One, those students that would come from sort of privileged background and probably going to liberal arts colleges would have a decent education to begin with. And two, that you kept them occupied and you taught them skills like being on time and work ethic and all those things that would be useful to them when they went to work in the factories as soon as they got old enough to work in the factories. And so, you know, not much was happening there. And after World War I, we had Smith-Hughes Act, in which after they saw the incredible lack of literacy and education among the people that went to fight in World War I, they realized that, you know, we were going to have to provide trades training for some of these people because, you know, they can't read, they can't write, they're not very smart, not very bright. And, you know, if that was the first use of IQ testing in World War I, by the way. And so most of the folks that went off to fight the war were really classified as sort of, well, for lack of a better term, ignorant. And so after the war, then there was the Smith-Hughes Act, and that's where you had the agricultural education and T&I, trade and industrial education, and you know, one or two others, I can't remember the other two. And then that was increased in 1935, in which they added things like marketing education or distributive education at the time, business education, you know, all those areas that became a part of federal money. And so prior to 1917, basically, the Smith-Hughes Act, not Smith-Hughes, but the Morrill, before the 1917 Act, we had not much money invested at the federal level in education, almost none. And then starting in 1917, then you had the money invested. 1930s, you had more money invested. After World War II, we had the GI Bill, but we still had a lot of soldiers that had not completed high school. And so we had, you know, the sort of the GED program created out of federal money. And then we had the GI Bill, which made big investments in higher education after World War II. And so it came along slowly. And then the biggest splurge came in the mid 1960s, in which we had the first iteration of what was No Child Left Behind. And every time it's reauthorized, they call it something different. But in 1964 or 63, I think, they called it the National Education Defense Act, because they made the case that in order to be able to face down the Russians, we were going to have to be smarter and brighter, and our educational system was going to have to step up. So we need to do some research in education to figure out what are better ways to do things. And out of that came special ed and bilingual ed, and a few other programs. The earliest instances of what later become morphed into STEM education, things like that. But the amount of money that was coming in mushroomed during the 1960s, to the point now that the federal dollars involved in local education are probably somewhere between 30 and 40%. When you look at all the money, the different ways that it comes, the federal dollar pays for 30–40% of the educational cost. And it's kind of misleading because the state, which pays for roughly maybe 60%, 62% or something of the local public education cost, actually counts among their monies federal funds that are pass-throughs that are there to pay for particular programs and special programs. And so some of the federal money doesn't show up as direct federal money into local school budgets. It shows up as pass-through money from the State Department of Ed. And then the little slice that's left, the 20 or 25%, or maybe even less than that in some places, is actually local dollars, primarily paid through property taxes. So it's, you know, the jumble of monies that's occurred in the last, say, 100 years has really changed the way in which sort of the responsibilities and the requirements of local education programs operate, to the point that every local education entity operates under a system of accreditation from the state, which operates under a system of compliances with federal laws and policies. And the currency of making sure that everybody does what they're supposed to do is dollars. It's always dollars. And no state, no school division can afford not to take federal dollars. Connecticut tried it, didn't work too well. You know, different places have tried it. And so you do have this jumble of different ways in which the funding occurs, but it's, you know, all this meeting what people want you to do is all bound up in dollars. And all that is a prelude to talk about the two different acts that we'll look at very briefly in North Carolina, two different parts of the North Carolina Code. One describes the requirements of the State Board of Education, which basically in just about all states runs makes all the decisions about what the guidance is, what the policies are, what the guidelines are for you know, local school divisions, and then that passes down to local schools. And we'll also look at the section in the North Carolina Code that specifically has to do with school improvement teams, because that tells you exactly how they have to be structured, how they have to be run, and in what ways, you know, what are the outcomes that they have to provide. And probably half of the school divisions in any state and half of the school divisions in North Carolina are probably not in compliance with the state code on school improvement teams. And so it's kind of an interesting conundrum we find ourselves in sometimes as to what we can do and what we can't do. Any comments or thoughts before we kind of look at that just a touch? Okay. Well, I'm going to go pull up the state code as relates to let me get rid of this thing. this one, which is, you know, the one that refers and talks about the powers of the State Board of Education in general. Now, at the state level, and this is almost true in every state, at the state level, there are two threads. One is a funding thread and one is a governance thread. And in North Carolina, like most states, there are a few exceptions. The State Board of Education is the governance thread, and the state legislature is the funding thread. And by law, the state legislature cannot directly tell the State Board of Education how to spend its monies by law. They can, however, pass legislation that requires the state board to do certain things. And this is the section of the North Carolina Code. I think this is entirely up to date, is except for what might be going on right at this moment. But this one talks about, you know, what is the state boards, what are their duties, and what are their powers. And in general, their duties and powers fall into three broad areas. One's accreditation, and they can tell schools a lot, school divisions a lot of what they have to do and what they have to report on that. And so in here, I don't know how many different subsections are in here, but most of those subsections, a lot of those subsections have to do with really accreditation issues and the ways in which schools have to be run in order to be considered accredited schools. Now, there is no regular evaluation assessment of that, but the state can at any time conduct an investigation of a school division to see if they're in compliance with accreditation requirements. And generally those accreditation requirements line up with SACs and things like that also. And so there's a bit of coordination going on in there. Accreditation is the first thing they do. The second thing they do is curricular. The state board is responsible for setting the state curriculum. Now, in lots of places, they push that off onto the Board of Education or local boards of education or work groups or things like that. But in some instances, it is fully kicks in, and the state board will tell local divisions exactly what their curriculum needs to look like. Now, under the accreditation piece is all the graduation stuff. What it takes to graduate, you know, how you can, you know, the guidelines under which local boards of education have to operate in order to be accredited and all that. And then the third piece has to do with you know, the teacher requirements, teacher certification, teacher education requirements for the accredited teacher ed schools, all those things. And so if you think of it in that way, there are those three broad areas that most of the state boards duties and responsibilities fall into. Notions of you know, we have to have accreditation, we have to have curriculum, and then we have to have school staff. We have to have teachers and you know, institutions to prepare future teachers. And so all of those things are encompassed in this this part of the section. And you ought to be, you know, you don't need to know this thing inside and out, but you ought to be somewhat familiar with you know, what sorts of things are in this section of the state code, particularly if you're going to be a principal. or a superintendent, because, you know, this is what you live with under. And so, you know, you really do need to be aware of what's in here so that you'll know what you can deal with and what you can't. Now, the funding piece from the state of North Carolina is a little bit odd, and it's an old model that's most states ditched maybe 30 years ago, but North Carolina has hung on to it because it's actually one of the cheapest model to run. And under the North Carolina model, there are different allotments that the state makes. And in general, there are two types of allotments. There's allotment that's based on positions. And so in North Carolina, local school divisions get monies based upon positions that occur that they have within the system. Numbers of teachers, numbers of librarians, numbers of whatever. They also get an additional allotment, supplemental allotment, for kids that require special services. Title I schools, kids that are categorized one way or the other, kids that are severe and profoundly handicapped, kids that are gifted and talented. And so there is this other pool of money that's based upon how many of those kids there are in your school system or what proportions in the school system. And then there's a third catch-all allotment that they use to do for special requirements, and you know, it's basically incentive money. That's different from a lot of other states who base their why is it important to get the student numbers right in North Carolina? Because each position has X amount of students that are required for that position, depending upon what the subject is and what the responsibilities of the position are. So you do a head count of kids, but then it's translated into positions, and North Carolina apportions money or allots money based on positions. And probably the majority of the states, probably 75% or more, the allotments from state funds are based on pupil head count, which is different model. Directly on pupil head count, so it's X amount of money per pupil head count. And so it's a different sort of funding in North Carolina. And there is a lot of sentiment now among policymakers, particularly more conservative policymakers, that North Carolina needs to get out of the allotment business and go to the pupil headcount business, because the allotment business allows ways in which school divisions can intermix monies and can also inflate counts in certain ways. In other words, if you're getting counted per position, then you're also getting additional monies for kids that are in free lunch programs, Title I monies. Then that's a double count in some political philosophers' notions. And so there is a sense that North Carolina is going to take a look at its funding, but they've been saying that for the last 20, 25 years. It hasn't happened yet, because they're kind of locked into a system that everybody's used to and everybody kind of understands the rules. So now the other, I'm gonna see if I can get to I'm gonna have to stop this share. Okay. Now, the other one is the one that you probably, if you were gonna have a good grasp on, that you would want to know this inside and out. And this is the one that's directly related to development and approval of school improvement plans. Because one of the duties of the state board, it's laid out in one of the articles up there, one of the duties of the state board is to develop a process to account for school improvement, continuous school improvement. And so in this, there's a very strict sort of guidance as to who should be on school improvement plans, how it should operate, who it should respond to, the way the meetings should be held, the types of public records that need to be kept and provided. This is interesting here. The school safety components of the plan are not public records. And so that's the one exception there. And then there is a school improvement plan. And it has staff development, how you would use money, shall include a plan to address school safety and discipline concerns, shall include a plan that specifies the effective instructional practice and methods to be used, may include requests for waivers of state laws or policies. Those are not approved readily. Shall include a plan to provide a duty-free lunch period for every teacher on a daily basis or as otherwise approved by the school improvement team. Shall include a plan to provide a duty-free instructional period for each teacher with the goal of providing an average of at least 5 hours of planning time per week. And shall include a plan to identify and eliminate unnecessary and redundant reporting requirements for teachers, and to the extent practical, streamline the school's reporting system and procedures, including requiring forms and reports to be in electronic form where possible, and incorporating relevant documents into the student accessible components of the instructional improvement plan. And so every improvement plan is supposed to have those direct strategies in it. That's probably where most schools are not in compliance, because they won't have addressed all those elements, all 8 of those elements. There has to be a school vote on the plan, staff members, consideration of school safety component to the plan. It goes on and on and on. Adoption of the plan, local board of education has to accept it. They have to send it to the state board, which has to sign off, or the State Department of Education, which has to sign off. There has to be a timeline. There has to be elimination of other unnecessary plans. In other words, no duplications, and compliance with with requirements. And this is basically a kind of a little bit of a whistleblower thing. Anybody should go to the principal, and anybody can reach beyond the principal to the superintendent if they think that something is not as should be. So under those guidelines, how many of you would assume that your school improvement plan is in compliance? Sure about it? Yeah, okay. It would be interesting to take a look. We did a survey 2 years ago of school improvement plans, and we only found roughly about 50% of them in full compliance. So, you know, it's worth just taking a look. Just to make.
Mine better be, because I'm in charge of it. That makes me very nervous.
Well, do you know that section of the code forward and backwards? Can
I have drowned myself in this stuff, but no, I did not know it forwards and backwards. Oh, that has been probably one of the biggest challenges, is try to make sure that everything is how it's supposed to be, and all the meetings are being held, and all your stakeholders are being represented, and just all those little puzzle pieces to put together. I can understand why it gets easily pushed to the side because it does require a lot of attention if it's done correctly.
Yeah, it does. But once you get one set in place, then it becomes a continuous document. And then the next one basically looks at the data to see, what you need to change or what you need to focus on next. And nothing ever really drops out of it. That's the part that people don't catch sometimes, is that it was a school improvement plan. You have a monitoring process going forward. And it might not be often, it might be once a year, it might be whenever, but it might be coupled with, evaluation, staff evaluation practices, or, there's always has to be a monitoring component to it that goes forward. And that piece basically never goes away. And that's why people put school improvement plans in 3-ring binders, so that you can just keep building on the old ones and come forward. But if you do it right, Leslie's exactly right. If you do it right the first time, then you're in good shape. And you just keep moving forward. But it is worth being, and I have to, as a program, we have to certify that we have acquainted you with those sections of the code. So consider yourself to have been acquainted. Okay. So how are the projects coming? Ready for the 5th? I am. I just finished reading 8 different qualifying exams for doc students. And now they're off my board. They're no longer exist. They're not in my thinking process anymore. And we have everybody that I've been responsible for that had needed to defend their dissertation has defended successfully. So I'm off that board too. So the entire month of April is nothing but getting your project feedbacks and rewrites and all that, so that we can knock this sucker out. Now, next week will be an asynchronous week also. There are a series of readings and videos for you to look at, and also guidance for the original groups to reconstitute, to look at the opportunity gap project. Now, each one of you will submit your own opportunity gap project. However, it is an opportunity for you to bounce off the other folks in your group your ideas and go back and forth. And so that's why we're doing an async next week. You will want to have looked at the readings. You will want to have thought of the identifying the opportunity gaps. You will want to have looked, there's a couple little videos in there too. You will want to look at those. And they're all related to this notion of opportunity gaps. And so that's where we go next. Then we'll come back together the week after that, which will probably might be the last synchronous session. Maybe not, but we'll see. Might be the last synchronous session. And then for the month of most of the month of April, it's you working on finishing off the projects that you have due and the rewrites that might be needed after I get a chance to look at them and give feedback. And then any one-on-one things that you need from me. If once again, if groups need one-on-one Zoom with me, or if individuals need a one-on-one meeting with me, that's the point. And so I've given you time, and I've given myself time to read these things and do any one-on-ones that we need. Questions? Or have you just kind of written me off, assume I don't exist because we don't meet? Is that it? You know, I generally get two kinds of feedback here. Yeah, at the end of the semester, I get two kinds of feedback. One, we didn't meet enough. Or two, we met too much and too long. Now, I'm not sure which is the worst sin there, but I always assume that if I keep offering to meet with you one-on-one or one for group, and nobody takes me up on it, then you must be perfectly fine with the amount of face-to-face time, particularly with somebody like me.
I honestly feel like it's been really good, the amount of face-to-face time. I mean, I've enjoyed the classes.
Well, I think it's
And you are so responsive to emails. I appreciate that. So
yeah.
long
If you
as I
don't
can get an
if
answer, I'm
you don't
good.
expect a response, don't send one. I have 3 iPads, I have an iPhone, and then I have 2 other computers. So, you know, there's always an iPad or an iPhone, probably within, you know, not even social distance away from it. So, you know, I don't social distance with my electronics. There's always there, and I will respond as quickly as I possibly can. So, you know, if you need help, give me a yell and don't wait till just the last minute. You know, that's okay. I can help then too, but you know, it would be probably less stress for you if you don't wait till the very last minute. So at least get a, you know, a good start on all these things, good draft on all these things, and then if you start thinking about deadlines and things like that, then you need a quick question answered or a quick redirect or something like that, be sure to let me know. Anything else?
I've got an interesting situation that may or may not be interesting to other folks.
Okay.
I finally got a chance to look at the school improvement plan project that we're doing, which I guess is our capstone. And apparently, well, first of all, my school doesn't have a school improvement plan. We're working on one right now. But apparently charter schools do not have to have the school improvement plan unless they've been identified as a low performing school. So
Yeah, that's sort of true. Yeah, it is true. Charter schools, the difference between charter schools and early colleges is that charter schools don't have to have a school improvement plan. You know, early colleges are supposed to have one, but it's different. It goes through the college system.
right.
But charter schools are not required to have one, but it is strongly suggested.
Yeah.
In other words, they don't have to send them to the state board. They don't have to send them to the state governing body. They're supposed to, I think, work with their local governing body. And so the form and things like that's entirely up to the charter school, but they're encouraged to have one, but not required.
Yeah. And we are doing one because I need a school improvement plan to do a project on.
Yeah, well, it might help you too. You might find it's a little useful.
So what I was going to ask you, so we are in the process, we've had like 3-4 meetings with the school improvement team. We've narrowed it down to the goals. Now we're, the next meeting. So those goals have been divided up into team members to create the, the strategies and action steps and all that. Is it okay for me to use this process for the
Absolutely.
project?
Absolutely. Don't do something you don't need to do. Absolutely. And then, I'll try to remember, but you might preface everything with just a little paragraph about, charter school requirements, stuff like that.
Right.
Just follow that model that you're following right there and provide me with, well, what you've done.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good. Other questions? Goodness, I did that fast. 46 minutes. Hopefully it has met the need for the moment. And I don't want you to think that I'm lonely or anything like that. I'm certainly not, but I will ask again. If you need me, I'm here. Okay. So just, all right. I just wanted to get that on tape one more time. So, so I can at least report that I offered students the opportunity to meet with me one-on-one, and we'll go from there.
I want to say too that your assignments have really good steps to follow. So it's like I don't feel lost like in that sense because I'm just following everything.
Yeah.
That I get everything that
Well, you can actually thank Dr. Howard for a good portion of that because, one thing I've learned in education a long time ago is you beg, borrow, and steal, and then ask for permission afterwards.
Absolutely.
And,
Amen, Zandy.
And everybody feels like, oh, I must have done something really nice if they want to use that. Of course you have permission. So you never ask permission up front. You ask permission on the backside, but you always, incorporate other people's good ideas too. And so a lot of that's hers. And then I have a few wrinkles to it too, but she was really the kind of the guiding force in, the specificity and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. But yeah, thanks. We try to please, try to get you there. You're all adults. You're all professionals. I don't treat anybody like a kid anymore. Although I'm probably old enough to be some of your grandfathers, but that's okay. Anyway, never mind. All right. Well, folks, I will see you in 2 weeks. Make sure you get the material looked at next week, and so that we have a chance to get you have a chance to reconstitute the groups, at least to talk about that topic area and what you're thinking about in terms of yours and what they're thinking about in terms of theirs, and bounce it off each other, and make sure that you have a pretty good sense about how people feel about the opportunity gaps that you're identifying. In most cases, they're pretty obvious, but some cases not. All right, folks. Y'all have a good night, and have a safe couple of weeks, and enjoy Easter. Eat all those, peanut butter eggs and stuff like that, and for God's sake, stay away from the peeps. Those things are, yeah. So y'all have a good one, and I will see you in 2 weeks. Unless you ask me.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy Easter.
God bless.
Dr. Bolt, I do have a question for you.
Sure.
So I'm in a charter school too, and we had a change in administration because the administration we had, basically they were fired because they weren't doing things how they were supposed to be doing, including our school improvement plan.
Yeah.
And so we're working on getting it together, but I'm kind of in the same boat that Rick's in. There are pieces that are compliant, but there are some pieces that are not.
Okay.
So,
well, like I told him, just give me what you've got, and in the areas where you're not compliant yet, just indicate that it's kind of on the radar that you're aware of this, but you haven't gotten that piece done yet.
okay. Yeah,
And,
this is our third year, and we've had a different administrator every year.
Yeah, that's kind of the issue with charter schools.
I like being in the charter school world. I really do. I like it a lot, and I'm learning a lot from administrator that I have now. I'm an EC teacher, and
Yeah.
she's my EC director, so I'm learning a lot from her in that sense. But they split up the position. It was like a head of school, and they split it up to 2 positions. So it's like a director of business, like human resources, and then a director of education.
Right, yeah.
It's nice. And so I'm kind of seeing both sides, but I was looking at that plan with her last week, and it looks really bad because our administrator was let go because they did not know what they were doing.
Yeah, well, you know, the credentialing thing is always an issue with charter schools.
Yeah, and that's another thing too. So the first year we were open, they didn't do great on the EOG, and we're D school. And so we were working to bring that up, but then last year they didn't take EOGs. And then this year we have a lot of kids on remote learning. And so it's just like, it's crazy. So we've been in classroom since October, but we have over 100 kids that are still fully remote. So
Yeah. And it's going to be that way for a while. And you know, the state's well aware of that. I mean, you're going to have some of those flagship school divisions that are in the same boat.
yeah.
And everybody's going to take a dip this year.
So
That's just what's going to happen. Yeah.
yeah, but I just wanted to tell you that I'm kind of in the same situation as Rick.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's fine. You know, just give me what you got, and then if you have, you know, plans on working on something, or something's in the works or whatever, kind of indicate that too, and
Okay.
that way I can kind of provide a little feedback on those things too. Yeah.
Okay, that would be great. And I really enjoy your class. So thank you. I know you were talking about that earlier, but I really do
Yeah.
enjoy your class.
No, I'm just kidding around about that, because it's, you know, it's I would prefer people get something out of the class and, you know, not sit around and listen to me ad infinitum. on
No,
this.
I like how your course is set up. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. All
Okay,
right.
well, have a happy Easter. Thanks so
You
much.
too. Yeah, take it easy. Stay
Bye.
safe. Bye.